Operation Citadel =RK Part 2 =RK Flag Bridge, Quasi-Star Dreadnought Defender, Hyperspace en route to Nemoidia. The second assault fleet built at Kuwait consisted of 500 warships concentrated around an armored fist made of star dreadnoughts and older battlecruisers. It was a powerful and respectable force even by the standards of this insane war. 300 of them currently tore their way through hyperspace, eating the distance between Kuwait and Nemoidia at prodigious rate. At the same time, the other, smaller part of the fleet approached battle-ravaged Balmorra. The timing was perfect. Intelligence assets confirmed that the enemy forces in the core had received the message about the fall of Rondon, which radically changed the separatists' strategic situation for the worse. Now the enemy was finally on the back foot and had to make a choice what to defend and what to abandon, the same choice the separatists had forced the Republic into in the months leading to the CIS Grand Offensive. A large, highly detailed map of the galaxy illuminated the flag bridge projected by a huge holotank. The massive bulky device served as the hub for the command center with everything else built around it. On the map, Lantilles, Ita, Kashyyyk and Rondon all blinked green, complete with symbols designating powerful fleets holding them, along with engineering units busy placing sensor platforms and all kinds of fixed defenses. Almost the whole fifth echelon slatted for Operation Starhammer had a singular purpose: to keep those systems out of enemy hands at all costs. Meanwhile, the other two echelons under General Vale's command struck in the direction of the core on three vectors highlighted on the map. First, the remaining elements of the third echelon, backed by battle groups from 4th Assault Fleet, led by Kuwait's own Admiral Midori Sanchez, advanced down the Trellon trade route. The latest dispatches confirmed that they had already secured Torn Station and were en route to Quoskilum, the last stop before Umbara itself. The rest of the fleet had struck Tolatin, reporting vicious fighting there between local SDF forces and hastily gathered Confederate reinforcements. This left Vale's own first assault fleet that had wasted no time after its major action at Rondon. As soon as its ships refueled, rearmed and executed emergency repairs, the Armada had divided in two huge task forces aimed at Ota and Disum respectively. The first and smaller one would eventually link up with Sanchez's fleet at Teresiskia after securing the Utmian Pabel and the Duantless Run. At the same time, the Admiral herself would advance down the Nigat Road, taking all worlds in her way. Once the two fleets met, they would strike along Pabel until its end at Gaindeen, where, if the plan didn't go to hell, they would reunite with Vale for the final push into the core. Meanwhile, the general had what strategic planners assumed was the tougher job. He was to capture everything along the tracks tube until Nanthri before striking down the Nanthri Road all the way into the core. He was expected to face major resistance at Nanthri itself, with the corresponding system being the logical place for the separatists to gather as many naval assets as possible. It was assumed that the enemy would draw everything they could afford from the western part of the galaxy, thus relieving the pressure upon the Mid-Rim Alliance as a bonus. The other source of ships the first and second echelons under the general's overall command would face would represent everything the separatist might draw from the core. Those forces would either try to slow them down and bleed them dry in multiple running engagements, concentrate on smashing one of the two major prongs of the attack, or make a stand at Gaindeen and thus, if all else failed, prevent a sweeping flanking maneuver straight into the core. That in fact was the biggest strategic opportunity Operation Starhammer offered. If the separatists decided to fight for their gains in the core and thus protect all the investments in fixed defenses they made since their grand offensive, there might be an opportunity to either cut off Admiral Trench or force him to retreat to avoid encirclement. While something like that actually happening was likely a pipe dream, just the capture and reduction of the enemy-aligned worlds in the Triangle would be a grave blow to the separatists' industry and morale. And if the Republic finally caught a break, they might retake critical systems in the core without having to face large separatist mobile forces, which would make the liberation of the Corellian system, for example, a much less bloody affair than anticipated. The holographic map painted a clear and comprehensive view of the galaxy-wide strategic situation. Just a glance was enough to show General Kenobi and his armada watching Trench at Corellia and keeping him honest. Freshly promoted Admiral Belinda Koenig, on the other hand, had a different, more immediate mission. She had to finally reduce the separatist bastion at Nemoidia and finish off the fighting at Balmorra, thus securing Kuwat's own sector. Once she had achieved her objectives and thus succeeded in Operation Citadel, she would be free to throw her fleet at Komentor. If she could retake said system, then the Republic would finally be able to reinforce multiple cut-off sectors and individual planets, not to mention open the other end of the Trellan trade route. The possibilities only grew from there. If the Admiral she could push a step further and recapture Rasteros, she would break wide open the Zeltros Manon Komentor pocket, immediately relieving a large number of cut-off Republic worlds, warships and ground units. One can dream, right? Balmorra and Nemoidia first though. We're 3 minutes out, Admiral. Advanced scouts confirm the screens at Nemoidia are still in place. Our aggressive probes are met by swarms of vulture droids, both upgraded and vanilla models. We don't have a comprehensive breakdown of the enemy forces in system. Koenig's intelligence officer reported. ETA of TF crate 2 minutes. We'll be striking both targets on schedule. Good. We're going with Plan Arush. The Admiral confirmed. At least until the enemy showed their hand, she added in her head. Koenig's forces had little training in the more advanced art of maneuver space warfare, in no small part due to the way Quati doctrine worked. It was much harder to train for it and execute such stunts when you built the core of your doctrine around ponderous star dreadnoughts and battle cruisers. On the flip side, those usually didn't need any cute tactical maneuvers. They were built to smash into and through whole fleets and reduce them to burning wrecks, and today, Kuwat's pride and joy would be deadlier than ever. The war did last long enough and the situation was desperate enough that in the aftermath of the enemy's grand offensive, the KDY Board of Directors authorized a crash upgrade course that coincided with the installation of the Guardian MKI system in the Behemoths. Practically all super capital deployed for Star Hammer had their primary weapons overhauled, shattering the now-defunct weapons restrictions that plagued the Republic for nearly 1,000 years, making them more dangerous than ever. That was what the Admiral counted on. She was about to throw an armada at Nemoidia and use the superior firepower and protection of the super capital ships to blow through everything the enemy could throw her way. ETA 1 minute, tactical stated. Shift main holotank tactical display. Prepare to link up with the Scout sensor suites. The galaxy map illuminating the compartment dissolved into static before reforming in a still of the Nemoidian home system as of 5 minutes ago. That was when the ship received the last large data bust from the Scouts. The Defender exited hyperspace gently, not giving any indication that it had smashed through the dimension barrier. We're being pinged by 4 Scout groups. 3 of them are under heavy small craft attack. Receiving data packages. Launch all fighters, deploy torrent wings to reinforce the Scouts, the rest are on CSP around the fleet. Keep the bombers in reserve for now. The zoomed-out system view rippled as sensors stabilized and began scanning everything in range, racing with the data streams coming from the Scouts. Koenig was not surprised by the almost complete absence of civilian ships in the system. There were just a few dozen present as of the last proper Scout update, and by now they had either departed, landed safely somewhere, or even now ran for the hyperlane entrance on the far side of the system. That make things a bit simpler. Tactical gleefully tagged everything that wasn't a Republic warship as hostile. As far as the enemy presence went, due to the screens masking Nemoidia and its orbital industry, all that could be detected clearly at the moment was swarms of vultures and a few frigate packs acting as the eyes and ears of the defenders. The tricky thing about said screens was that they worked both ways. On one hand, they prevented long-range observation in both directions. However, the defenders had in place the required relays and sensor platforms linked to them, allowing them to see past their own screens. Well, they had to put all those vultures somewhere, Koenig murmured to herself. With the rise of the Guardian system and the CIS counterpart, the Umbrella, using small craft against properly escorted capital ships became a futile waste of lives and resources for little to no gain unless you had truly overwhelming numbers to throw at the enemy. Against a fleet like Koenig's? She sincerely doubted that the enemy had concentrated enough of the little bugs to truly threaten her command. Rough estimates: 150,000 vultures massing to intercept us. Possibly more behind the screens. This was one of the largest such deployments since the war began. Unless the enemy had a few orders of magnitude more of them, they could at worst hurt her. However, they had no prayer of stopping the onslaught. It was too bad for the separatists that she had some new toys to test. After all, for some time the enemy has been doing its best to expend their obsolete droid fighters by throwing them en masse against the Republic in order to soften the Navy's capital ships before the CIS-own fleet units could come to grips with them. Fire Plan Archer. Let's see what the new missiles can do. The fleet will advance towards Nemoidia at flank speed. Look for minefields and other unpleasant surprise. Keep the formation loose, and every ship is to commit independent maneuvers within to minimize the chances of ramming attacks. Over 1,000 engine pods lit up and second assault fleet charged at Nemoidia. RK equals interlude, a special treat. RK equals AN. While my muse still refuses to properly cooperate with RK2, I've jolted down a lot of ideas about the future of this story, its planned sequel, RK3, the Black Rebellion, and the Rogue Knight universe in general. Below is a story idea that incorporates some of my ideas of how the galaxy would look after the Clone Wars are finally over. Disclaimer: I do not own Star Wars of Worm. They belong to their respective copyright owners. This story is not created with commercial purpose. I make no money from it. Mandalorian Knights MK equals Prologue MK equals Sundari City, Mandalore. Mandalorian Freehold Capital World / Federated Galactic Empire Member State / Good Morning, Galaxy. A pretty blue-haired human-looking woman smiled at the camera. I'm Amanda Lawson and this is GNN's In Tune. Today we're broadcasting live from Sundari City on Mandalore, where, as you can see behind me, rebuilding efforts proceed apace 1 year after the end of the Clone Wars. We're on top the damaged Mandal Motors corporate HQ, one of the few buildings that emerged reasonably intact after the fighting on this world finally ended 4 years ago. The camera drones zoomed in to show closely the ravaged cityscape behind and the beehive of activity taking place all over. Ships, droids and workers in commercial exoskeletons buzzed over almost every building in sight, busy with rebuilding efforts. Yet, all of those paled in comparison to 36 titanic figures striding with a purpose through wide streets long cleared of debris. The smallest of those behemoths was 20 meters tall, with the tallest engineering mobile suit towering at 35 meters. Current projections from the Freehold Reclamation Board suggest that preliminary work here in the restored capital would be done in time for the 1-year anniversary of the Victory Day. Many locals we interviewed during the previous few days claim that they are ready to work like demons to make Sundari safe for the coming celebrations. This year, Mandalore the Restorer and the Clan Council have proclaimed a week-long celebrations over the victory in the war, a victory bought in no small part thanks to Mandalorian determination and sacrifices all over the galaxy. The purpose of this long celebrations is to honor not only everyone who sacrificed through the long conflict that not so long ago threatened us all, but to allow the Imperial family to celebrate at home before moving back to the Imperial capital of Coruscant for the galaxy-wide holiday on Victory Day. That's right, folks. Empress Satine Kenobi and Emperor Obi-Wan Kenobi will be leading the celebrations here in Sundari in person, right along with Mandalore the Restorer himself, General Delcatar Vale, and his wife, the war hero Bo-Katan Vale, the Empress' own sister. But that's not all. Amanda beamed and walked away from the terrace overlooking the Mandalorian capital. The camera drones followed her graceful movements until she stood in front of a low glass table covered with snacks and beverages. Today's special treat is an interview with the Freehold's financial minister and CEO of Mandal Motors, Horace Yomaget, and 2 of the leading scientists working for him. They have a stunning announcement to make. It's good to meet you again, Minister Yomaget. Horace, please. The middle-aged Mandalorian offered a pleasant smile. Please take a seat, Amanda. I can call you Amanda, right? Of course, Horace. Thank you for hosting us today. Amanda took a seat on one of the armchairs around the table and leaned forward. You said you had something special to announce today. Shoot. Well, we thought about making it an official press conference, however when we heard you're here within tune, we thought GNN will be perfect for you. After all, you've been almost exclusively fair and honest in reporting throughout the war, not like some of your rivals in the news business. Oh, you make me blush, Horus. We at GNN had always strived to bring the truth as we know it to the countless beings across the galaxy, Amanda gushed. I'm pleased to announce that we here at Mandel Motors made an extraordinary discovery a few weeks ago. While our Research and Development Department in conjunction with the Imperial Technological Bureau followed through on certain projects began under Chancellor Palpatine, our scientists managed to make a breakthrough. They created a stable breach into an alternative dimension near an inhabited world. I'm sure that the Empress and Mandalore the Restorer will be following on this announcement at noon local time, Amanda, along with many details. This is in a way of heads up, then Horus? Lawson asked eagerly. Indeed, Amanda. The reason for this is simple. We expect a large furore among a lot of our human citizens, both here in the Freehold and across the galaxy. You see, we've made a peaceful first contact with the locals, exchanged preliminary data, and what we've discovered is extraordinary. The world we contacted, called by the locals Earth Bet, is at least in their dimension, humanity's home world, complete with all the relevant scientific proof, archaeological, paleontological, biological. Humanity, at least in Earth Bet's reality, evolved there. What's more, we weren't the first people from another dimension they've made a contact with. As we speak, they're in contact with an alternative version of their own world called Earth Aleph. Wow, that's fascinating hours. What else can you tell us? How was this discovery made? Who were the people who made first contact? What can you tell our viewers about Earth Bet? Well, Amanda, it all began 2 weeks ago after our scientists managed to establish a contained and controlled dimensional breach. First we did send a few probe droids, and once we had some idea of local language, customs and politics, we dispatched a scouting party made of Mandel Motors security personnel, all experienced and level-headed veterans from the war. Operation Citadel =RK=, Part 3 =RK=. The next phase of the Clone Wars began when the Republic launched Operation Starhammer, the campaign to liberate the core and neutralize the Separatists' holdings in the central regions of the Mid-Rim. Operation Citadel, launched from Kuat, was a vital part of that strategic offensive. While Starhammer itself achieved strategic success by declining to assault Corellia in its opening phase and instead concentrated on Rondon and securing supply lines for its next step in the Mid-Rim, Citadel could enjoy no such surprise. The Confederacy strategists always knew that the Republic would sooner or later move to neutralize Nemoidia and secure long-contested Balmorra. At best, Admirals Koenig and Tull would have had short-lived tactical surprise on their side. There was no surprise. When 2nd Assault Fleet left Kuat, an event that long-range detection stations at Nemoidia and Balmorra couldn't miss, there was no doubt about the destination, especially when the fleet divided in 2 distinct task forces. The Great Battles of the Clone Wars. Zucker Publishing House. =RK=. Flag Bridge. Republic Battle Cruiser Avenger. TF Resolute Flagship. Balmorra. The only thing missing to make this irony any more cutting was Vale, the Sith himself leading the assault on Balmorra. The last time the Republic had to liberate this world, it was from the Sith, after Vale himself was the one to finally break the old Republic-backed resistance and secure it for the Empire. This time around, the Republic was allied with the Sith, fighting against Jedi-backed madmen. In a nutshell, newly promoted Rear Admiral Georg Tull had yet another proof that the galaxy had gone insane while no one was paying attention. Sensors are clearing up. We've got heavy jamming, multiple point sources at Balmorra, both in orbit and on the surface. We're steadily burning through enemy jamming. Tactical reported. In the middle of the Flag Bridge, a large holotank showed a detailed map of the system, though right now the only sure thing was the location of large celestial bodies and friendly units. Tull had his capital ships arranged in a phalanx formation meant to maximize the heavy firepower of his battle cruiser divisions. There were 4 of them forming the nucleus of his fleet, and while old, they had been upgraded as much as time and available resources allowed. Serrated ranks of cruisers, primary venottas with a smattering of dreadnoughts formed around his heaviest ships, which anchored the formation. In between them, with more than enough space for independent maneuvering, flew the escorts, 120 frigates and corvettes. Their primary job was to thin out enemy small craft swarms and intercept any and all ramming attempts. At the back of the fleet flew 10 acclamators escorting twice their number of converted carriers. That was the planetary assault force, anemic as it was. The bulk of the ground forces slatted for Operation Starhammer were still back in friendly space waiting for the Navy to establish clear space superiority before deploying to liberate worlds lost during the enemy's grand offensive. That in practice meant that the ground component of Tull's fleet had a singular purpose: to establish a secure beachhead on Balmora's surface, a safe place to land additional forces as they became available. The rough plan was that the 3 clone legions and 2 newly raised divisions should be able to succeed and hold with the help of liberal application of orbital bombardment. That more than anything else demonstrated how the war had grown progressively worse and more vicious. Less than a year ago, such tactics would have been unthinkable, not to mention, politically unacceptable as far as most Republic commanders and their political leadership were concerned. Nowadays? Unless the target planet was a friendly one slatted for liberation, liberal application of orbital firepower to conserve friendly ground forces was the SOP. Honestly, Tull wasn't sure what to think about that particular mess. What he knew for sure was that if he was one of those poor infantry types, he would be screaming for all the orbital support too when facing overwhelming number of droids, something that was a given. Intelligence, what was left of it anyway, claimed that the enemy has been busy hauling as many droids as possible to hold worlds in the core and bleed the Republic dry as it tried to liberate them. It was a cold-blooded strategy, and unfortunately it might even work on the ground. In space, no chance in hell if Georg had anything to say about it. We're burning through enemy jamming. Confirming Balmora SDF, they have been reinforced. Reading 50% more battleships compared to best-case scenario. Tactical reported in a wry tone. The best-case scenario had been wishful thinking at best, pure fantasy at worst, just like pre-war and early war estimates of the enemy fleet size. 50% about best case was good. That was actually less hardware than Tull expected to face. The Quati admiral silently watched and waited for the other shoe to drop. It was possible that the enemy had written off this system and merely had left enough forces to bleed Georg's fleet instead of trying to stop it cold. The enemy deployment made sense in that regard. The Cis fleet was deployed very close to the planet, within the gravity well, which meant that if things went wrong for them, the odds of escape were minimal. They were also deep within the planetary defense grid, and in order to get to them, Tull would have to come well within its effective range, which was the point. The fleet will advance. 3/4 acceleration. Fire plan Besh. Clear up all mines and soft targets first to neutralize as much enemy firepower as fast as possible before concentrating on all those battleships. Launch fighters, CSP only. Keep 25% in reserve, Tull continued. Nearly 2,000 torrents, 3 wings of the new Z-95 interceptors and a few squadrons of various prototype small craft streaked out of their hangars and took position around and within the fleet. There was no trace of enemy fighters, nor bombers. Just standard complement for the already identified battleships would have put them at tens of thousands at least, with more stationed on the planet, a potent force, very dangerous one in the days before Guardian. Now, it was entirely possible that every single small craft the Cis had in the region had been either concentrated at Nemoidia or pulled back towards Corellia. Either that or the enemy commander was feeling creative, which admittedly was something to be concerned about. 2 minutes to effective weapons range. Still no reaction from the enemy. Tactical reported the obvious. Oh, there were all kinds of targeting sensors sweeping all over the 2 fleets. However, the Cis ships refused to move, nor did they launch a single vulture. I don't like this. Cut acceleration to 1/3 and keep your eyes wide open. Tull ordered. Push the screen elements 50,000 kilometers forward and have them engage the light fixed defenses first. Release 5 fighter wings to sweep for mines and weapon satellites. The plan went off without an accident until the two fleets entered effective firing range of each other. There were mines, swarms of them, hundreds of weapon platforms meant to deal with small craft or, if they could concentrate their firepower, be a threat for smaller escorts. They died under a barrage of capital ship firepower, the guns of the escorts and starfighters throwing themselves into the fire and paying the according price. Over 100 fighters and 11 damaged escorts were the price Tull paid to open a hole in the defense perimeter and a way straight to the enemy fleet. The butcher's bill would have been much, much higher if the enemy's mobile elements had surged forth. They didn't. In fact, entering effective weapons range, fleet is firing for effect. And the enemy moved back towards the planet. Tugs lit up, they were hidden behind the two defense stations. The stations are slowly moving our way. Fleet is engaging. Those stations couldn't last long against Tull's heavy firepower. They didn't need to, they were a sacrificial offering. The enemy ships, both Luckery hulks and munificent frigates alike, launched a few turbo laser salvos at extreme range before slowly entering Balmora's atmosphere. What the hell? Obviously, this was a part of the enemy commander's brainstorm, it was just that it made no sense. No. It did make a perfect sense in hindsight. He outnumbered this enemy fleet by a significant margin. He had the firepower to engage and destroy them in a conventional engagement. He had to in order to secure the system and move on other objectives. With those ships safely protected by Balmora's planetary shields and all anti-orbital weaponry that the Sis had built since the planet joined them, Tull now had two very simple choices: set down for a protracted siege that would neutralize the bulk of his fleet as well as if they were destroyed or heavy damaged. Either that or assault anyway, which would rob him of most of his advantages. Balmora's atmosphere was going to offer an additional layer of protection for the enemy ships from energy weapons, and while this worked both ways, the ground-based planetary defenses would be powerful enough to extract a frightful toll upon his fleet, and that would be on top of the damage his ships would suffer in passing through the planetary shield. At least Balmora didn't have one of the newest and most expensive systems that would prevent such an options and require to batter them down first, a long and expensive process in the first place. RK equals Part 4 RK equals The assault on Nemoidia, which was the core objective of Operation Citadel, was notable for multiple factors. This was the first battle in which Kuat finally deployed its supercapital ships and concentrated them in overwhelming numbers. While there were multiple quasi-battle cruisers and Star Dreadnought under the overall command of General Vale, he would only deploy them all together for a single battle during his part of Operation Star Hammer. It was at Nemoidia that the galaxy truly saw the might of properly concentrated and competently commanded divisions of supercapital ships, an event that would give birth to a new arms race. Said battle is notable for another event: it was the last time both sides deployed large numbers of conventional small craft, starfighters and bombers, in both offensive and defensive roles. In its aftermath, small craft would play the role of an additional defensive ring around a fleet or converge on crippled enemy capital ships to finish them off. The deployment of new classes of heavy fighters and bombers, and the advent of the so-called mobile armor would replace starfighters in the strike role, relegating them to defensive tools in space. Third and perhaps most impactful in the short term was the casualties both sides suffered. Confederate resistance both in space and later on the ground was determined, fanatical even. If the Republic military and political leadership had any illusions about how easy it might have been to recapture the core, Nemoidia shattered them. The impact on morale and expectations was most keenly felt among the civilian population because of the final most notable event the assault of Nemoidia is known for. This was the first battle in the war where the great majority of warship crews and ground forces slated to invade the planet were not clones. The Great Battles of the Clone Wars, Zucker Publishing House, RK equals Flag Bridge, Quasi-Star Dreadnought Defender, Nemoidia, 150,000 vulture droids. No matter how you sliced and diced that number, it was an impressive amount of hardware. It wasn't exactly cheap in raw resources, build time nor money. Rough estimates citing pre-war prices put the price of a Venator as an equivalent of about 1,200 to 1,500 such fighter droids. Mass production, war economy and upgrades to both the Vultures and the Republic cruisers naturally distorted such crude assessment even further. Still, the first thing that clued Admiral Koenig about what bug nest she was about to kick in was the fact that the enemy threw the rough monetary value of 100 Venators at her force as a mere probing attack. The Vultures didn't make it past the defense ring surrounding her fleet in enough numbers to case any real damage, which was the only good news. They first had to tangle with a spread of heavy capital missiles with antimatter warheads, fueled by antimatter 2. When those detonated within the leading swarms, they vaporized thousands of fighters and left many more drifting dead in space with their internals turned into irradiated wrecks. The remaining droids immediately scattered, spreading out not to remain big juicy targets. That in turn meant significantly reduced casualties by the next two missile salvos, which was more than acceptable trade-off. The Guardian systems, escorts and 30,000 torrent fighters the fleet carried were more than up to the task of shredding the dispersed swarm. However, reducing the probe didn't come without price. Nearly 1,000 starfighters died while throwing themselves at the Vultures. 20 corvettes emerged from the engagement as little more than drifting wrecks leaking air and at least 3 times their number or damaged to some extent. Still, this was a fair trade. Before Guardian and the new missiles, such a droid fighter swarm would have been a deadly threat to Koenig's fleet. The next stage of the battle was up to the Republic's small craft. Koenig unleashed nearly 10,000 torrents as an escort for 3,000 bombers, nearly half the Y-wings she had at her disposal. They converged upon the closest screen, obscuring Nemoidia flying on the heels thousands of missiles launched by her capital ships. Small defense stations, weapon platforms and a simply ridiculous amount of mines met the strike craft. Those defenses had to be cleared out the hard way and Koenig's people were up to the task. Antimatter fire, proton torpedoes and even old-fashioned fusion warheads lit up Nemoidia's skies as one of the screens simply shattered under the onslaught. It took a few moments for the fleet's sensors to cut through enemy jamming, radiation and exotic particles produced by the battle, and for the first time in more than a year, the Republic saw Nemoidia clearly. The orbitals around the planet had been turned into a deadly gauntlet. In the visible sector of space alone, Koenig could make no less than 4 Golan battle stations, hundreds of large defensive platforms of an unknown class, something likely locally designed and certainly locally built. Then there were the mobile forces. Behind the destroyed screen hid at least 30 battleships, over 100 frigates and destroyers. And another 100,000 vultures, which were busy accelerating towards her exhausted small craft. Pull our fighters and bombers back. Redline the engines and prepare for emergency deceleration. I want spread of special ammunition to cover our small craft's retreat. Koenig wasted no time in issuing orders. Nemoidia was going to be a very tough nut to crack, as expected and planned for. Too bad, for the enemy, that Belinda didn't forget to pack the biggest hammer the Republic had available. What followed was the largest furball Admiral Koenig had ever seen. While the Separatists kept their capital ships safely within the orbital defenses, they continued to feed more and more vultures into the cauldron. Seeing no other choice, Belinda sent more and more of her escorts into the fray, even whole Venator divisions, in order to add the guns of their Guardian systems into the fight. That was when the enemy commander finally released a few divisions of their own capital ships. Koenig saw them emerge from the other side of the planet, coming over its north pole, just skimming over the gravity well. 6 battleships complete with escorts made a hyperspace jump right above the furball, and while the munificent frigates threw themselves into the fray, the Lucree hulks rotated to keep their hangar entrances safe and launched more small craft. 2 can play this game. 7th and 11th Venator divisions execute a hyperspace insertion on the flank of those battleships and return the favor. Koenig ordered. 6 Venators and their escorts detached from the top of the Republic formation and soon blinked out of existence. When they emerged on the Lucrehukes flank, the Venottas rotated two in order to present their lower side to the enemy while their hangar doors opened to disgorge squadrons of fresh Y-wing bombers. At this range, the enemy umbrella system couldn't stop them all, especially as it had to contend with short-range mass torpedo strikes launched from pods added to the Republic escorts. From then on, the fighting simply grew more vicious and desperate for both sides.